For me personally, now that I know how to deal with microaggressions, I'd probably try and inform the person, even if it's not directed towards me or my race. I'd try and help out and inform them of why it could be offensive to other people or why that was offensive to me, rather than reacting aggressively, because sometimes they're ignorant and you just need to help inform them, and then they'll, won't even know that it's offensive. Then they can fix that moving forward. And maybe the second time, if it comes up again, you can give them a reason of why that was not the right thing to say.
So women's basketball actually learned about microaggressions this summer, and since then I can't even tell you how many times we've called each other out on microaggressions and just kind of let each other know, like, that's a microaggression. And so calling each other out is one thing, and so that going forward, like, they are recognizing what they're saying. And then another thing is, a lot of times microaggressions can be like unintentionally hurtful, and so showing people grace and knowing that they have progress to make. So just those two things.
So I think that in the meeting we had a lot of really good conversation about ways to approach people when you hear them saying things that are microaggressions that they may not even realize, in a calm way that isn't really attacking, especially if they're people you're close to who might not even realize the way things they're saying are affecting the people around them.
Knowing what I know now, the best way to solve, or the best way to handle that situation is to definitely handle it in the moment. Definitely let people know that what they said or what they did or how they act is isn't acceptable, and that there's a problem with that and we need to fix it right away.
I think that they were all very eye-opening. We had several examples and we only got through a handful of them because we were able to go so in depth with each one, and everybody that could relate gave their opinions on their personal situations. But then people who couldn't relate, I think it was just extremely educational for those to listen.
I think all the ones that were given at the meeting were pretty eye-opening. We talked about each one at length. One specifically that comes to mind was, are you a girl or a boy in the relationship? And though this doesn't relate to me personally, I can see how that would be offensive to anyone in the LGBTQ community. And, seeing that it's not only race that can have microaggressions, but also, on the other side of that, and having, LGBTQ athletes talk openly about that seems pretty big to me, and that can be another huge thing that Let's Chat can help with.
A lot of them were definitely things that I've heard before but didn't really apply to me, so I just didn't pay any attention to it. But some of them in the meeting I definitely hit hard for me, definitely applied, and it was good to see that other people can relate to some of the things that I've gone through, but it kind of sucks seeing that it's so common.
I don't think many of them were directly correlated to myself or I can necessarily relate to, but I do think a lot of them are things that I've heard and not really realized that they were microaggressions or the way that they affected the other athletes in the room. So I think that moving forward it'll be really important to kind of be more careful about what I say or the things people say around me.
It was definitely a lot more comfortable having them in the room, because they just get to hear the conversation happen rather than us sort of having to bring it up or sort of remember what happened and sort of tell them about it, or just trying to explain everything that happened without giving too much detail. But it was definitely a lot better to have them in there.
It felt fine for me. I can't speak to the athletes whose coaches they were. My coach wasn't in there personally, but it felt good. It felt like a good first step in the right direction. And yeah, I'm excited to get more coaches in there in the future.
I really liked having the coaches in the room for this meeting. I think it was really nice to hear them give their input, because they're not always seeing and hearing what players are saying around them or what's going on in all the practices, but for them to get more of a wide view of how their players are feeling is definitely really important for their programs.
I think coaches do, or at least my coach does a really good job with knowing her own team and situations that her own team is going through, but for coaches to listen to other athletes and the things that they go through, I think it was super eye-opening for them. I really enjoyed having them there. They gave really good advice towards the end of the meeting, and it was just a good extra perspective to have.
I learned from the athletes that they can be really open with their answers. I feel like the way that we've set this up for Let's Chat with Dr. Booker and Caitlin has been an amazing collaborative effort. I felt like the athletes were able to speak freely, tell their stories, have a safe space, and be able to definitely tell us the things that they've been through, the things that they're going through, and it really hit me hard with some of their trials and tribulations of life so far.
One thing that I learned about the athletes is that they're so much more than an athlete, in a sense of they're having to deal with all the struggles of a regular student, as well as the competition of sport, as well as all of the social unrest going on. And so it's a lot to unpack. And so one thing that I learned about our athletes is that they're resilient.
You know, as a society, I feel like we have not evolved. When I played, we never really worried about outside issues or anything going on in the world. I think part of that is the news. A lot of it is social media. And we just went to school, played our sport, made friends in so many different other with so many different other athletes. It just was we never had political issues, social issues. Everybody was an athlete, and we respected each other that way. And I think nowadays, these kids with the social media and everything, they have to identify as something. And they are classified in different things. And I think that's the hard part for our athletes right now, is that they may identify as a softball player or a lacrosse player or a basketball player, but they also have to think about their skin color or their religion or their sexual preference. And I think when I played, that was not anything that we really talked about.
I'm only 3 years out, so I feel that we almost had the same struggles or very similar, and so I feel a bunch of empathy towards our athletes. But what I will say is I think that from when I was a student here to now, it's a lot more progressive in that these athletes are taking further steps than even when I was in school to create change. And I think that that's the best part, is that even though that the struggles are similar, they're doing things to actually make a difference and try to be the change in the world that we want to see.
I think that if we have any players that are struggling or want to talk about these issues, I would tell them to talk to their coaches or talk to other coaches, talk to the coaches on the MAID panel, and know that they have a safe space with us. I think that they have resources that they may not know that they have, and if they want to reach out, I think it's so important that they reach out to their coaches or our trainers and make sure that they feel like they have a safe space with us. And my last piece of advice is to stay off of social media as much as possible.
One thing that we talked about was continuing to educate yourself and others. And for our athletes, one of the questions that they asked was, how can they start the conversation? And we discussed a few ways to do that, especially with family life and going back home over the holidays. And my advice is to continue to have these hard conversations. You can tell just by hearing them and their talk that they want to have these hard conversations, that they are willing and open to start a conversation about microaggressions, to start a conversation about gender norms, And so my advice is to keep that going, and silence is okay. Like, it's one of those things where if you start a conversation and you don't immediately get an answer, it's all right to wait and see what somebody else has to say. And so
My advice is to keep the conversation going and to continue to get more people in that room.